The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Nora Kelly stood at the edge of Willow Creek, a small, dusty settlement in the New Mexico Territory, 1882. The weight of her father's pocket watch felt heavy in her palm as she stared down the lonely trail that stretched before her like a sun-bleached ribbon. The town behind her had taken everything: her father, her home, and now her dignity. There was nothing left for her here but painful memories and unpaid debts. A gust of wind tugged at her worn calico dress, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Nora adjusted the small bundle of belongings under her arm and took a deep breath. 23 years in Willow Creek, and now she was leaving with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few precious keepsakes. "Miss Kelly," Sheriff Thompson's voice boomed from the direction of town. "Your father's debts ain't settled yet." Nora quickened her pace, refusing to look back. The sheriff had made it clear that morning she either find a way to pay what her father owed or face working off the debt at Madame Rosa's establishment. Neither option was acceptable. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race, but she kept walking, her chin lifted defiantly against the fading light. She wouldn't run. Running made you look guilty, and Nora Kelly had done nothing wrong except being born to a gambling father who loved cards more than he loved staying alive. "Madam, you're heading into open country on foot. Night's coming." The voice that addressed her wasn't Sheriff Thompson's. It was deeper, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. Nora stopped but didn't turn. "I'm aware of the time of day, sir, and I prefer it to the company behind me." The rider guided his horse around to face her. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, darkened by stubble. "Name's Nathan Everett," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you look like you're running from something fierce." "I'm not running," Nora replied, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "I'm simply leaving." Nathan's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted and pawed at the dirt. "Alone at dusk in rattlesnake country." His tone wasn't mocking, just matter of fact. "That's a good way to end up dead by morning. I'll take my chances with the snakes over what waits for me back there." Nora gestured toward town with a tilt of her head. Nathan looked past her toward Willow Creek, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sheriff giving you trouble?" Before she could answer, they both heard the unmistakable sound of more riders approaching from town. "That would be him now," Nora said, her voice tight. "Along with Mr. Hargrove, I expect, the man my father owed money to." Nathan considered this for a moment, then extended his hand down to her. "Come on, I can get you to the next town." Nora stared at his hand, suspicion evident in her eyes. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know trouble when I see it," he replied. "And I've never been fond of Hargrove or his methods." The approaching riders were visible now, kicking up dust as they rode hard toward them. "I don't accept charity," Nora said, even as she eyed the oncoming threat. Nathan's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Then consider it a loan. You can pay me back once you're settled somewhere safe." The sound of Sheriff Thompson calling her name decided for her. Nora reached up and allowed Nathan to pull her onto the horse behind him. His body was solid and warm against the evening chill. "Hold tight," he instructed, and then kicked his horse into a gallop, veering off the main trail and into the brush. Nora had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist as they rode hard away from Willow Creek. The wind whipped her chestnut hair from its pins, and she ducked her head against Nathan's back to shield her face from the sting of it. As they crested a ridge and the sounds of pursuit grew distant, Nathan slowed the horse to a more sustainable pace. "There's a place we can stop for the night about an hour's ride from here. Old line cabin that belongs to a friend." "I can't impose," Nora began, but he cut her off. "You'll never walk alone again," he said, his voice so low it was almost carried away by the wind. "Not while I'm around to help." Something in his tone made her heart skip a beat, though she told herself it was merely the adrenaline of escape. Nora Kelly was no fool to be swayed by a handsome face and a moment of kindness. Life had taught her better than that. Yet as they rode through the gathering darkness, The solid presence of Nathan Everett before her felt like the first safe thing she'd known in a very long time. The line cabin was little more than a one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, but it offered shelter from the elements and prying eyes. Nathan dismounted first, then offered Nora his hand. She hesitated only briefly before accepting his help, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed ride. "Wait here," he said, drawing his revolver before approaching the cabin. He checked inside carefully before motioning for her to join him. "It's clear, hasn't been used in a while, but it'll do for tonight." The interior was sparse: a small iron stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. A layer of dust covered everything, but it was dry and out of the wind. "I'll get a fire going," Nathan said, holstering his weapon and moving to the stove. There should be some supplies in that cabinet. Nora found a tin of coffee and some jerky, along with a few cans of beans. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She busied herself with preparing a simple meal while Nathan tended to his horse outside. When he returned, he carried his saddlebags and bedroll. "You can take the cot," he said, dropping his gear by the door. "I'll sleep on the floor." "That hardly seems fair," Nora replied, stirring the beans she'd put on to heat. "You're the one who rode all day." "I've slept in worse places, Miss Kelly." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Without the shadow of his brim, she could see his eyes clearly, for the first time a striking blue that reminded her of the summer sky. "Nora," she said, "if we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my name." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Nora it is, then." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire in the stove and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. After dinner, Nathan cleaned their few dishes while Nora tried to make the cot more presentable, shaking out the old blanket that lay across it. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his back to her as he worked. Nora paused, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. Someplace where no one knows me or my father, someplace I can start fresh." "Your father, he's gone, died 3 months ago. Heart gave out during a poker game." She tried to keep her voice neutral, but the pain was still raw. "Left nothing but debts and his good name, which wasn't worth much in the end." Nathan turned to face her, leaning against the crude wooden counter. "I'm sorry, losing family is never easy, no matter the circumstances." There was something in his voice that suggested personal knowledge of such loss. Nora wanted to ask, but felt it wasn't her place. Instead, she said, "What about you? Where are you headed?" "I've got business in Santa Fe," he replied. "After that, I'm not sure. I've been drifting for a while now." "A cowboy without a home," Nora observed. Nathan's expression grew distant. "I had a home once, a ranch in Texas, lost it during the war." The war between the states had ended 17 years ago, but its long shadow still fell across the lives of many. Nora nodded in understanding. "So you've been wandering ever since, more or less." "Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, took odd jobs where I could find them." He shrugged. "It's not a bad life, but it gets lonely sometimes." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Nathan quickly changed the subject. "We should get some rest. I want to be on the trail before dawn in case Hargrove's men decide to keep looking." Nora agreed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The events of the day had drained her completely. She settled onto the cot while Nathan spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove. "Thank you," she said softly as he extinguished the lamp. "For helping me, you didn't have to." In the darkness, she couldn't see his face, but she heard the rustle of movement as he settled. "Get some sleep, Nora," he replied, his voice gentle. "Tomorrow's another day." Dawn broke cold and clear, with a hint of frost sparkling on the scrubby grass outside the cabin. Nora woke to find Nathan already up, tending to his horse and preparing for their departure. She quickly freshened up using water from the small barrel outside, grateful for the comb she'd packed in her bundle. They shared a simple breakfast of coffee and the last of the jerky before setting out. Once again, Nora found herself seated behind Nathan on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist as they rode eastward. "We'll skirt around Willow Creek," he explained, guiding the horse through a narrow canyon. Add a few miles to our journey, but it's safer than risking a run-in with Hargrove's men. How do you know Hargrove? Nora asked, curious about the edge in Nathan's voice whenever he mentioned the man. Nathan was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to share. Let's just say we've had dealings in the past and they didn't end well. He's not a forgiving man, Nora agreed. After my father died, he gave me 1 week to come up with the money. When I couldn't, he made it clear what my options were. Nathan's back stiffened slightly. What exactly did he say to you? Nora hesitated, embarrassed to repeat Hargrove's crude propositions. He suggested I could work off my father's debt at Madame Rosa's. When I refused, he said he'd make sure I couldn't find honest work anywhere in town. Nathan's hands tightened on the reins. Sounds like Hargrove hasn't changed. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves lulling Nora into a contemplative state. The landscape around them was rugged, but beautiful red rock formations jutting up against the vast blue sky, scrub brush dotting the sandy soil, and the occasional cluster of pinyon pines providing welcome shade. "What will you do once we reach Santa Fe?" Nathan asked, breaking the silence. Nora had been pondering this very question. "Find work, I suppose. I can sew well enough, and I kept the books for my father's store before he lost it. Perhaps a shop would hire me. No family you could stay with? None that would welcome me," she replied with a bitter laugh. "My mother's sister lives in Kansas City, but she made it clear years ago that she wanted nothing to do with my father or anyone associated with him." "Her loss," Nathan said simply. The sincerity in his voice caught Nora off guard. She found herself blinking back unexpected tears and was grateful he couldn't see her face. Around midday, they stopped by a small creek to rest the horse and eat some bread and dried apples Nathan had in his saddlebag. As they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Nora studied her companion more carefully. Nathan Everett was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or 32, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and years of outdoor living. His hands were calloused, his skin tanned, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. What struck her most, however, was the gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance, the careful way he treated his horse, the respectful manner in which he spoke to her. "You're staring," he observed, glancing up from the piece of jerky he was cutting. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just wondering what kind of business you have in Santa Fe." Nathan offered her a piece of the dried meat. "I'm meeting someone who might have information about my brother." "Your brother, James," Nathan said, his expression growing somber. "He disappeared about 6 months ago. Last anyone saw him, he was heading toward Santa Fe with a cattle buyer named Collins." "And you think something happened to him?" Nathan nodded. "James was reliable. He would have sent word if he could. When I didn't hear from him for 2 months, I started asking questions. Found out this Collins has a reputation for shady dealings." "I'm sorry," Nora said, understanding now the look she'd seen in his eyes when they spoke of loss. "I hope you find him. Me too." Nathan stood, brushing off his trousers. "We should keep moving. I'd like to make it to Cimarron by nightfall. There's a decent boarding house there where you can have a proper bed for the night." Nora thought of the little money she had, barely enough to last a week if she was careful. "I can't afford, consider it part of that loan," Nathan interrupted with a small smile. "You can pay me back when you're settled." She wanted to refuse to maintain her independence, but the thought of a real bed and a hot bath was too tempting. "All right, but I will pay you back, every cent." "I don't doubt it for a minute, Miss Kelly," he replied, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. They reached Cimarron just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the main street. It was larger than Willow Creek, with several businesses lining the dusty road: a general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, and the boarding house Nathan had mentioned. Mrs. Abernathy, the boarding house proprietor, was a plump, cheerful widow who clucked over Nora's travel-worn appearance. "You poor dear, you look dead on your feet. I'll have a bath drawn for you right away." While Nora bathed and changed into her spare dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, Nathan saw to his horse and secured a room for himself at the modest hotel across the street. They agreed to meet for supper at the small restaurant attached to the boarding house. The hot bath had worked wonders for Nora's spirits, and she felt almost human again as she made her way downstairs. Nathan was waiting for her, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Something in his expression as he watched her approach made her stomach flutter nervously. "You clean up nice," he said with a smile, standing as she reached the table. "As do you," she replied, taking the seat he offered. "Though I fear this is my only other dress, so don't get used to the improvement." Nathan chuckled. "I wasn't complaining about your appearance before." The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread that reminded Nora of her mother's baking. They ate hungrily, the day's ride having worked up quite an appetite. "How far is Santa Fe from here?" Nora asked as they lingered over coffee. "About 3 days' ride if the weather holds," Nathan replied. "We'll need to resupply before heading out tomorrow." The mention of supplies brought Nora back to her financial situation. "I should look for work here," she said, more to herself than to Nathan. "I can't keep accepting your charity." "It's not charity," he insisted, "and 3 more days won't break me. Besides, Santa Fe will have more opportunities for someone with your skills." Nora wanted to argue but found she didn't have the energy. The comfort of a real meal and the prospect of a soft bed were making her drowsy. "Perhaps you're right," she conceded. After supper, Nathan walked her to the door of the boarding house. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll come by after breakfast and we can visit the general store before heading out." Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. In the lantern light from the porch, Nathan's blue eyes looked almost black, but they were warm as they studied her face. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything." For a moment she thought he might say something more, but he simply nodded and stepped back. "Good night, Nora, sleep well." She watched him walk away, a strange mix of emotions stirring within her. In just one day, Nathan Everett had become more than a stranger who'd helped her escape. He'd become someone she was beginning to trust, perhaps even care about. The realization was as unsettling as it was unexpected. With a sigh, Nora turned and entered the boarding house, where Mrs. Abernathy showed her to a small but clean room with a real feather bed. As she slipped between the fresh sheets, Nora found herself wondering about the cowboy who'd whispered those words that had touched something deep within her. "You'll never walk alone again." It was a promise she knew he couldn't keep, not in the long term. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, Nora couldn't help hoping that somehow it might turn out to be true. Morning arrived with a gentle knock at Nora's door. Mrs. Abernathy's cheerful voice informed her that breakfast would be served in 20 minutes. Nora dressed quickly, eager for a hot meal before the day's journey. The boarding house dining room was bustling with other guests: a traveling salesman, a middle-aged couple, and an elderly gentleman who tipped his hat politely as Nora entered. She took a seat near the window, helping herself to coffee from the pot on the table. She was halfway through her eggs and biscuits when Nathan appeared in the doorway. He scanned the room, his expression brightening when he spotted her. Several of the female guests turned to watch him as he crossed to her table, and Nora felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been possessiveness. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat as he sat across from her. "Sleep well, like the dead," Nora admitted. "A real bed makes all the difference." Nathan signaled to Mrs. Abernathy for coffee. "I've been thinking about our route. There's word of some Apache activity east of here, so we might need to adjust our plans." Nora set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. "Apache, are they hostile?" "Hard to say. There's been peace for the most part since Geronimo's surrender, but there are still renegade bands that cause trouble occasionally." Nathan thanked Mrs. Abernathy as she filled his cup and brought him a plate of breakfast. "I don't want to take unnecessary risks, especially with you along." The concern in his voice warmed her, even as the news worried her. "What do you suggest?" "We could take the longer route through Las Vegas, the New Mexico one, not Nevada," he clarified with a small smile. "It's an extra day, but the trail is more traveled and safer." "You're the guide," Nora said. "I trust your judgment." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes at her words: surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. We'll need extra supplies then. I was thinking we could visit the general store after breakfast. After they'd eaten, they walked together to Cimarron's general store, a large establishment with wide plank floors and shelves stocked with everything from tools to fabric to canned goods. While Nathan selected jerky, coffee, and ammunition, Nora found herself lingering by a display of women's necessities. "See something you need?" Nathan asked, joining her with his arms full of supplies. Nora fingered a simple cotton nightgown, then regretfully shook her head. "No, just looking." Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the shopkeeper. "Why don't you pick out a few things? A change of clothes at least." "Nathan, I can't consider it an advance on your first week's wages in Santa Fe," he interrupted. "You'll need proper clothes for job hunting anyway." The practical argument was hard to refute. After a moment's hesitation, Nora selected the nightgown, a plain but sturdy dress in a soft green color, and some essential toiletries. Nathan added them to his purchases without comment, though she noticed a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as the shopkeeper wrapped her new dress in brown paper. Outside, they stowed their supplies in Nathan's saddlebags. The day was clear and mild, perfect for traveling. As Nathan helped Nora onto his horse, his hands lingering slightly at her waist, she found herself wondering again about the man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. What would happen when they reached Santa Fe? Would he simply see her settled and then continue his search for his brother? The thought left her feeling oddly bereft. They rode out of Cimarron heading southeast, taking a less traveled trail that Nathan assured her would be safer than the main route. The landscape gradually changed as they rode, the rocky terrain giving way to rolling grasslands dotted with piñon trees and the occasional cluster of wildflowers. "It's beautiful country," Nora commented as they paused at midday to rest the horse. "So different from what I imagined when I thought of New Mexico." "It changes with every mile," Nathan agreed, passing her the canteen. "Wait until you see the mountains near Santa Fe. They turn purple at sunset like nothing you've ever seen." Nora took a drink, watching him over the rim of the canteen. "You sound like you know the area well." "I spent some time around Santa Fe a few years back, worked for a rancher named Donovan." His expression grew distant. "Good man, taught me a lot about cattle and horses." "Why did you leave?" Nathan shrugged, taking back the canteen. "Restlessness, I suppose. After losing the family ranch, I never could settle anywhere for long. Always felt like I was just passing through." "And now, are you still just passing through?" His blue eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "I don't know. Maybe it depends on what I find in Santa Fe." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Nathan cleared his throat and stood. "We should keep moving. There's a spot about 2 hours from here where we can make camp for the night." As they continued their journey, Nora found herself thinking about Nathan's words. What was he hoping to find in Santa Fe besides information about his brother? And why did she care so much about the answer? The campsite Nathan chose was a small clearing near a stream, sheltered by a stand of cottonwood trees. While he saw to the horse, Nora gathered wood for a fire, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs after the long ride. "You're good at that," Nathan observed as she efficiently arranged the kindling. "My father used to take me fishing," Nora explained, sitting back on her heels. "He taught me how to build a proper fire. It was about the only practical thing he ever taught me." Nathan struck a match, lighting the small pyramid of twigs she'd constructed. "Sounds like you and your father had a complicated relationship." "That's one way of putting it." Nora watched the flames catch and grow. "He was charming, fun-loving, and completely irresponsible. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, it was just the two of us. He tried in his way, but he couldn't resist a game of chance or a get-rich-quick scheme, and you stayed with him all those years." It wasn't a question, but Nora answered anyway. "He was all I had. And despite everything, I loved him." She poked at the fire with a stick. "What about your family? You mentioned your brother, but what about your parents?" Nathan settled beside her, stretching his long legs toward the warmth of the flames. "Both gone. Pa died during the war, not fighting, but from pneumonia after our house was burned by Union soldiers." Ma hung on until 75, then her heart gave out one winter. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. It was a long time ago, Nathan replied, though the shadows in his eyes suggested the pain was still there. After Ma died, it was just James and me running what was left of the ranch. We were doing all right until last year when drought hit and we lost half our cattle. James went looking for work to tide us over, and that's when he disappeared. And you've been searching for him ever since, Nathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. I sold what was left of the ranch, figured I could always buy land again, but family, that's not something you can replace. The depth of his loyalty to his brother touched Nora deeply. It was rare to find such devotion in a world where most people looked out only for themselves. As darkness fell, they prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon. The night air grew chilly, and Nora found herself moving closer to the fire, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Here, Nathan said, noticing her discomfort. He shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. Won't you be cold? She asked, though she gratefully pulled the warm garment around her. I'm used to it, he assured her, returning to his place across the fire. Besides, I've got the coffee to keep me warm. The coat smelled of leather, tobacco, and something distinctly Nathan, a clean, masculine scent that Nora found oddly comforting. She drew it closer, feeling enveloped in his presence even though he sat several feet away. After they'd eaten, Nathan suggested she get some sleep while he took the first watch. I'll wake you in a few hours, he promised, though Nora suspected he might let her sleep through the night. She unrolled her bedroll, another item Nathan had purchased in Cimarron, and settled down near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. She lay watching the stars through the branches above, listening to the soft sounds of the night and the occasional movement as Nathan added wood to the fire. Nathan, she said softly, not sure if he was still awake. Yes. His voice came immediately from the darkness. Thank you. Not just for the coat, but for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. There was a pause, then she heard him shift position. Get some sleep, Nora. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow. His tone was gentle but firm, closing the subject. Nora turned onto her side, pulling the coat closer around her. As she drifted towards sleep, she couldn't help wondering if Nathan Everett was the kind of man her father had always warned her about, the kind a woman could lose her heart to without even realizing it was happening. Sometime in the night, Nora woke to the sound of movement nearby. Opening her eyes, she saw Nathan kneeling beside her, his hand hovering as if he'd been about to wake her. What is it? She whispered, instantly alert. Riders, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances. Stay low and quiet. Nora sat up slowly, her heart pounding. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Nathan moved to gather their belongings, quickly and quietly packing everything but the bedrolls. He doused the fire with dirt, plunging the camp into darkness lit only by the stars and a sliver of moon. We need to move, he said, returning to her side. Can you ride in the dark? Nora nodded, though the prospect terrified her. If I must. They worked together to saddle Nathan's horse, then led it away from the camp into a thicket of trees. The voices were closer now, and Nora could make out snippets of conversation. Said they was headed this way. Reward's good enough to make it worth the trouble. Nora looked at Nathan, fear evident in her expression even in the darkness. Hargrove's men, sounds like it, he agreed grimly. They must have followed our trail from Cimarron. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant to bring trouble to your door. Nathan's hand found hers in the darkness, giving it a reassuring squeeze. This isn't your fault. Hargrove's had it in for me since Texas. You're just giving him an excuse to come after me again. Before Nora could ask what he meant, the riders came into view, 4 men on horseback, moving slowly as they examined the ground by the light of a lantern. Fire's still warm, one of them called. They can't be far. Nathan drew his revolver, checking that it was fully loaded. Stay here, he whispered to Nora. If something happens to me, take the horse and ride east. Keep the North Star on your left and you'll reach Las Vegas by morning. I'm not leaving you, Nora protested. but Nathan was already moving away, circling behind the men who were now dismounting to search their abandoned campsite. Heart in her throat, Nora watched as Nathan positioned himself behind a large boulder. She couldn't see what happened next, but suddenly there was a shout, followed by the sound of a scuffle and a single gunshot that echoed through the night. Nora bit back a cry, straining to see in the darkness. For several agonizing moments there was silence. Then she heard Nathan's voice, low and dangerous. "Drop your guns, all of you." The men complied, the sound of weapons hitting the ground clear in the still night air. "Now mount up and ride back to Hargrove," Nathan continued. "Tell him Nathan Everett says to let it go, or next time I won't be so generous." "Everett," one of the men sounded surprised. "We wasn't told it was you. Hargrove just said to bring back the Kelly woman." "Well, now you know," Nathan replied coldly, "and the lady is under my protection." "Understood." There was a murmur of assent, then the sounds of men mounting and riding away. Nora waited, hardly daring to breathe, until Nathan returned to her side. "Are you all right?" she asked anxiously, reaching for him in the darkness. "I'm fine," he assured her, though she could hear the tension in his voice. "Just a scratch where one of them got lucky with a knife. We need to move, though. They might come back with reinforcements." "You're hurt." Nora's hand found his arm, feeling the warm wetness of blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. "It's nothing," Nathan insisted, already moving to bring the horse. "We need to put some distance between us and this place before dawn." Despite his protests, Nora insisted on binding his wound with a strip torn from her petticoat before they set off. In the faint moonlight, she could see a gash about 4 inches long on his upper arm, but as he'd said, it didn't appear to be dangerously deep. They rode through the night, Nathan guiding the horse with confidence despite the darkness. Nora held tightly to his waist, her cheek pressed against his back as she fought exhaustion. Despite the danger and discomfort, she found herself drawing strength from his solid presence before her. Dawn found them several miles from their camp, in a rocky area where Nathan said their trail would be harder to follow. They stopped briefly to rest the horse and eat a cold breakfast, neither of them wanting to risk a fire. "What did you mean when you said Hargrove had it in for you since Texas?" Nora asked as they shared a canteen of water. Nathan's expression darkened. "We had a disagreement over a business matter." "What kind of business?" he sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "I was working as a trail boss for a cattle drive. Hargrove was one of the buyers in Dodge City. He tried to cheat the owner by claiming the cattle were diseased and offering half the agreed price. I called him out on it, things got heated, and I ended up breaking his nose in front of half the town." Nora's eyes widened. No wonder he holds a grudge. "Men like Hargrove don't forget easily," Nathan agreed, "but I never thought he'd follow me all the way to New Mexico." "He's not following you," Nora pointed out. "He's following me, or rather my father's debt." Nathan studied her thoughtfully. "How much did your father owe him?" Nora hesitated, embarrassed by the amount. $500. He borrowed it to buy inventory for the store, then lost most of it playing poker with Hargrove and his friends. To her surprise, Nathan didn't look shocked or judgmental. "That's a sizable sum, but not enough to justify this kind of pursuit. There's something else going on here." "Like what?" "I'm not sure," Nathan admitted, standing to check on his horse. "But Hargrove doesn't do anything without a reason, and his reason is usually profit." They continued their journey, altering their route to avoid the main trails where Hargrove's men might be watching. The day grew hot, the sun beating down mercilessly as they crossed open country. By mid-afternoon, both they and the horse were feeling the effects of the heat and their sleepless night. "There's a ranch about an hour from here," Nathan said as they paused in the shade of a large outcropping. "Belongs to a man named Martinez. He owes me a favor. We could rest there tonight." Nora nodded gratefully. The prospect of a safe place to sleep was too tempting to refuse, even if it meant another delay in their journey. The Martinez Ranch was a modest spread with a small adobe house, several outbuildings, and a corral containing a dozen horses. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the setting sun. "Quien vine," he called, then broke into a wide smile as he recognized Nathan. "Everett, my amigo." The two men greeted each other warmly, speaking rapidly in a mix of English and Spanish that Nora couldn't entirely follow. After a moment, Martinez turned to her with a respectful nod. "Welcome to my home, señorita. Any friend of Nathan's is welcome here." "Thank you," Nora replied, grateful for the hospitality. Martinez's wife, Elena, was equally welcoming, ushering Nora into the cool interior of the house while the men saw to the horse. The simple adobe structure was immaculately clean, with colorful woven rugs on the floor and religious icons adorning the walls. "You must be tired, pobrecita," Elena said, her English heavily accented but clear. "I will prepare a bath for you while you eat." True to her word, Elena served a delicious meal of beans, tortillas, and spicy stewed meat, followed by a bath in a copper tub behind a screen in the kitchen. The hot water was heavenly after days on the trail, and Nora nearly fell asleep as she soaked. After her bath, dressed in her new nightgown with her clean dress laid out for morning, Nora joined Nathan and the Martineses in the small parlor. Martinez was telling a story about a mountain lion that had been preying on his calves, while Nathan listened attentively, occasionally asking questions in Spanish. Nora was struck by how at ease Nathan seemed here, as if he belonged in this world of ranchers and wide open spaces. It was a sharp contrast to the restless drifter he described himself as being. When Elena noticed Nora stifling a yawn, she immediately stood. "You must rest now. I have prepared the small bedroom for you, señorita." "Where will Nathan sleep?" Nora asked, suddenly conscious of the arrangements. "He will stay in the barn with the men, as always," Elena replied with a smile. "Do not worry, he will be comfortable." Nathan walked Nora to the small bedroom, a simple space with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed covered in a brightly colored quilt. "Sleep well," he said, lingering in the doorway. "We'll leave after breakfast. Martinez says there's been no sign of riders in the area, so we should be safe here." "Nathan," Nora began, not sure what she wanted to say, but feeling that something needed to be acknowledged between them. "I get some rest," he interrupted gently. "We can talk tomorrow." After he'd gone, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts in turmoil. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully understand. The prospect of reaching Santa Fe, which had once seemed like salvation, now filled her with a strange anxiety. What would happen when their journey ended? Would Nathan simply deliver her safely to the city and then continue his search for his brother, leaving her to find her own way? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. With a sigh, Nora blew out the lamp and lay down, pulling the colorful quilt around her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was long in coming, her mind too full of a certain blue-eyed cowboy and the uncertain future that awaited them both. Morning brought the delicious aroma of fresh coffee and frying bacon. Nora dressed quickly in her new green dress, grateful for the clean clothes after days in her travel-worn attire. She pinned her hair up as neatly as she could with her limited supplies, wanting to look presentable for the kind couple who had opened their home to her. In the kitchen, she found Elena at the stove while Martinez and Nathan sat at the table, deep in conversation. Both men rose when she entered, and Nora couldn't help noticing the appreciation in Nathan's eyes as he took in her appearance. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Buenos dias," Elena replied, gesturing for her to sit. "You look rested, señorita. And very pretty in that green dress." "Thank you for your hospitality," Nora said as she took a seat across from Nathan. "You've been so kind to take in strangers." "Nathan is no stranger," Martinez said with a warm smile. "He saved my life once when bandits attacked my herd. And any woman he protects is welcome in my home." Elena placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and tortillas before Nora. "Eat, eat. You need strength for your journey." As they ate, Nathan and Martinez continued their conversation, occasionally lapsing into Spanish. Nora gathered they were discussing routes to Santa Fe that would avoid the main trails where Hargrove's men might be watching. "There is a path through the mountains," Martinez was saying as Nora finished her meal. "It is longer but safer. Few know of it. Can we make it in 2 days?" Nathan asked. Martinez considered this. "If you ride hard and the weather holds, yes." There is a lined shack halfway where you can spend the night. After breakfast, Alina packed them food for the journey while Martinez saddled a fresh horse for Nathan, insisting that his friends mount needed rest after the hard riding of the past days. "It is a loan only," the rancher said when Nathan tried to refuse. "You will bring him back when your business in Santa Fe is finished." As they prepared to leave, Alina pressed a small bundle into Nora's hands. "Some food and a shawl for the cool nights," she explained. "And this," she handed Nora a small silver medallion on a chain. San Cristobal, patron of travelers, for protection. Touched by the woman's kindness, Nora impulsively embraced her. "Thank you for everything," Alina patted her cheek. "Be happy, Nina, and take care of that one." She nodded toward Nathan, who was securing their supplies to the saddle. "He has been alone too long." Before Nora could respond, Nathan called that they were ready to depart. With final farewells to the Martinez family, they rode out, taking the mountain path as recommended. The trail led them upward through increasingly rugged terrain, the air growing cooler as they climbed. By midday, they were high enough that Nora could look back and see the Martinez ranch in the distance, a tiny oasis in the vast landscape. "They're good people," Nathan commented, following her gaze. "Yes," Nora agreed. "Alina gave me this." She showed him the saint's medallion hanging around her neck. Nathan smiled. "San Cristobal, she gave me 1 year ago, said I needed all the protection I could get." "You've known them a long time, since '75. I was working as a scout for the army when I found Martinez half dead after an Apache raid, got him back to his family and helped rebuild what was destroyed." Nathan shrugged as if it were nothing. "We've been friends ever since." "You have friends all over, it seems," Nora observed. "For a drifter, you've put down more roots than you admit." Nathan looked thoughtful at this. "Maybe never thought about it that way." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady clop of the horses' hooves on the rocky trail. The mountain landscape was breathtaking, pine forests giving way to dramatic cliffs and sweeping vistas. Occasionally, they startled a deer or a covey of quail, the wildlife abundant in this less traveled region. By late afternoon, they had reached a high plateau where the trail leveled out somewhat. In the distance, Nora could see the peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, their summits touched with the last of winter's snow despite the May warmth. "We'll reach the lined shack before dark," Nathan said, pointing to a distant ridge. "It's just beyond that rise." The lined shack proved to be a sturdy log structure, similar to the one they'd stayed in their first night on the trail, but in better repair. It had a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a single bed frame with a straw mattress. While Nathan tended to the horse, Nora set about making the cabin habitable. She swept the worst of the dust out the door with a crude broom she found in the corner, then laid out their supplies on the table. By the time Nathan returned, she had a fire going in the fireplace and was heating water for coffee. "Looks like you've done this before," he commented, setting his saddlebags by the door. "My father and I moved around a lot before settling in Willow Creek," Nora explained. "I've made homes out of worse places than this." Nathan helped her prepare a simple meal from the provisions Alina had packed: bean soup, dried fruit, and fresh tortillas that were still soft. They ate by the fire, the mountain air growing chilly as night fell. "We should reach Santa Fe by tomorrow evening," Nathan said as they finished their meal. "Earlier if we make good time," Nora nodded, trying to ignore the pang the words brought. "And then you'll look for news of your brother." "Yes, my contact works at a saloon near the plaza. If anyone knows anything about James, it will be him." Nathan studied her across the fire. "What about you? What will you do once we reach the city?" "Find work, I suppose, a room somewhere." Nora tried to sound more confident than she felt. "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will," Nathan agreed, though his expression was troubled. "But you don't have to do it alone, you know." Nora looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Nathan seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I mean I could help you get settled. Make sure you're safe before I continue my search." "That's very kind, but you've done more than enough already," Nora replied, though her heart sank at the confirmation that he intended to move on once they reached Santa Fe. It's not kindness, Nora. Nathan's voice had grown softer. Surely you must know that by now. The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. What is it, then? Before he could answer, a sound outside the cabin froze them both, the unmistakable snort of a horse, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Nathan was on his feet in an instant, drawing his revolver. "Get behind the table," he whispered to Nora, moving toward the window. Heart pounding, Nora did as he instructed, crouching low as Nathan cautiously peered out into the darkness. "I count 3 riders," he murmured. "No lanterns." "They're trying to approach quietly." "Hargrove's men," Nora whispered. "Most likely. They must have been watching the trails after all." Nathan moved to the door, checking that it was securely barred. "The cabin's solid. They can't get in without making a lot of noise." "What do we do?" Nathan considered for a moment. "Wait them out. They might think we've already moved on if there's no response." They extinguished the lamp but left the fire burning low, not wanting to alert their pursuers to their presence by sudden darkness. Nathan positioned himself by the window, weapon ready, while Nora remained behind the table, her heart hammering in her chest. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there, Everett. Come out and bring the girl." Nathan remained silent, signaling for Nora to do the same. "We just want to talk," the voice continued. "Hargrove's offering to forget the debt if you both come peacefully." When there was still no response, the tone grew more threatening. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. There's only one way in or out of that cabin, and we've got it covered." Nathan motioned for Nora to join him by the window. "There's a back way," he whispered when she reached his side. "A trapdoor under the bed that leads to a root cellar. From there, a tunnel comes out about 50 yards down the slope. Martinez showed it to me years ago. It was used during Apache raids." Hope flared within Nora. "We could escape while they're watching the door," Nathan nodded. "I'll create a distraction. When I give the signal, you take the horse and ride hard for Santa Fe. Follow the trail we were on, it leads straight there eventually." "I'm not leaving without you," Nora protested. "Yes, you are," Nathan insisted, his expression brooking no argument. "I'll be right behind you, but I need to know you're safe first." Outside, the men were growing impatient. "Last chance, Everett, come out now or we start shooting." Nathan quickly explained the escape route to Nora, then helped her move the bed frame to reveal the trapdoor beneath. It opened with a creak that made them both wince, revealing a narrow ladder leading down into darkness. "I'll fire a few shots to keep them occupied," Nathan said, checking his ammunition. "That should give you time to get to the horse and away." "Nathan," Nora began, but he cut her off with a brief, fierce kiss that left her breathless. "Go," he whispered against her lips. "I'll find you in Santa Fe." Before she could respond, gunfire erupted outside, bullets splintering the wooden shutters. Nathan pushed her toward the trapdoor, then took up position by the window, returning fire. With tears blurring her vision, Nora descended the ladder into the dank root cellar. She could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire above as she felt her way along the narrow tunnel, praying that Nathan would keep his promise and follow. The tunnel emerged, as he'd said, down the slope from the cabin. In the moonlight, Nora could see the outline of the small structure, now illuminated by muzzle flashes as the gunfight continued. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way to where their horse was tethered in a small copse of trees. The animal was nervous from the gunfire, but allowed her to mount. With a last glance at the cabin, where Nathan was fighting to buy her time to escape, Nora reluctantly turned the horse toward the trail and urged it into a gallop. She rode hard, the mountain path treacherous in the darkness, but fear for Nathan and the knowledge that Hargrove's men might pursue her kept her pushing forward. The medallion Alina had given her bounced against her chest with each stride of the horse, and Nora found herself murmuring prayers that Nathan would escape safely. Dawn was breaking when she finally allowed the horse to slow to a walk, the poor animal lathered with sweat and breathing heavily. Looking back, she could see no sign of pursuit, but neither was there any sign of Nathan. The realization that she was truly alone for the first time since leaving Willow Creek struck her with unexpected force. Tears threatened again, but Nora blinked them away. Nathan had risked his life to give her this chance, and she wouldn't waste it by falling apart now. She would continue to Santa Fe as planned and trust that he would find her there, as promised. The sun was high overhead when Nora spotted the first signs of civilization, a small farm with fields of corn and beans stretching toward the foothills. Soon after, she passed a stagecoach heading in the opposite direction, the driver giving her a curious look as she rode past alone. By late afternoon, exhausted and saddle-sore, Nora caught her first glimpse of Santa Fe. The city sprawled across a plateau, its adobe buildings the color of the surrounding earth. The spire of the cathedral rose above the other structures, a landmark visible for miles. As she approached the outskirts of the city, Nora realized she had no idea where to go. Nathan had mentioned a saloon near the plaza where his contact worked, but she didn't know its name or even where the plaza was located. With no other plan, she decided to head toward the cathedral, reasoning that the plaza would likely be nearby. The streets grew more crowded as she entered the city proper. Santa Fe was larger and more bustling than she'd imagined, with a mix of Mexican, Indian, and American influences evident in the architecture and the people she passed. Under different circumstances, Nora might have been fascinated by the new sights and sounds, but now she was too worried about Nathan to appreciate them. She reached the plaza as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the open square. Dismounting stiffly, Nora led the tired horse to a water trough, considering her options. Several saloons lined the streets around the plaza, any one of which could be the one Nathan had mentioned. "Señorita, are you lost?" A middle-aged woman selling flowers from a cart approached her with a concerned expression. "I'm looking for a saloon," Nora replied, feeling foolish. "I don't know its name, but a friend said he would meet me there." The woman raised her eyebrows. "A saloon is no place for a lady alone." "Please," Nora said, desperation creeping into her voice. "It's important. My friend, he might be in trouble." Something in her tone must have convinced the flower seller. "There are 3 saloons on the plaza. The Silver Dollar is the largest, then El Toro, and the smallest is the Coyote." "Thank you," Nora said gratefully. "Do you know which one might have someone who knows about people who have gone missing?" The woman's expression grew wary. "That would be the Coyote. Old Manuel knows everything that happens within 100 miles of Santa Fe." She pointed to a narrow building on the far side of the plaza. "But be careful, señorita, it is not a place for decent women." With renewed hope, Nora led the horse across the plaza toward the Coyote Saloon. As she approached, she could hear piano music and raucous laughter spilling out into the street. The building was indeed small, sandwiched between a general store and what appeared to be a blacksmith shop. Tying the horse to a hitching post outside, Nora gathered her courage and pushed through the swinging doors. The interior was dimly lit and hazy with smoke. A scarred bar ran along one wall, behind which stood an elderly Mexican man with a white mustache. A handful of tables were occupied by rough-looking men playing cards or drinking, while a tired-looking woman in a gaudy dress played a tinny piano in the corner. Conversation faltered as Nora entered, all eyes turning to stare at the disheveled woman in the dusty green dress who so clearly didn't belong. Fighting the urge to flee, Nora approached the bar. "Excuse me," she said to the bartender, who was watching her with undisguised curiosity. "Are you Manuel?" The old man nodded slowly. "I am, and you, señorita, are in the wrong place." "I'm looking for someone," Nora pressed on. "A man named Nathan Everett. He said he was coming to see you about his brother, James." Manuel's weathered face showed recognition at the names. "Ah, Nathan." I was expecting him, but not you, señorita." "Kelly, Nora Kelly." She glanced around nervously, aware that several of the patrons were still watching her with interest. "Nathan was helping me get to Santa Fe when we were attacked. He stayed behind to give me time to escape." "I'm worried he might be hurt or worse." The old man's expression softened slightly. "Nathan is a friend. Come, we should not talk here." He gestured to a young boy who had been sweeping the floor. "Watch the bar, Carlos." Then he led Nora through a door behind the bar into a small office crowded with ledgers and bottles. Now, tell me what happened, Manuel said, offering her a chair. From the beginning. Nora explained as concisely as she could how Nathan had helped her escape from Willow Creek, their journey toward Santa Fe, and the attack at the line shack the previous night. Manuel listened attentively, his dark eyes revealing nothing. When she finished, he stroked his mustache thoughtfully. This Hargrove, he is the same man Nathan had trouble with in Dodge City. Yes, Nora confirmed. Nathan said they had a disagreement over cattle. It was more than that, Manuel said grimly. Hargrove was running a scheme buying healthy cattle for half price by claiming they were diseased, then selling them at full price elsewhere. Nathan exposed him, cost him a lot of money and reputation. He shook his head. A man like Hargrove does not forget such things. Then it's not really about my father's debt at all, Nora realized. Hargrove is using that as an excuse to go after Nathan. Most likely, Manuel agreed, but now what to do about Nathan, he considered for a moment. I have friends who can ride to the line shack, see if he is there or if there are signs of what happened. Nora swallowed hard at the implication. How long would that take? They could leave tonight, be back by tomorrow afternoon. Manuel studied her with sympathy. Meanwhile, you need rest, food, and a safe place to stay. I will ask my niece if she has room for you. That's very kind, but I can't impose. Nathan would expect me to help you, Manuel interrupted firmly, and I owe him a great debt. Too exhausted to argue further, Nora accepted his offer. Manuel sent for his niece, Louisa, a kind-faced woman in her 30s who arrived within the hour to escort Nora to her home. Louisa lived in a small but comfortable adobe house a few streets from the plaza, with her husband, a carpenter named Diego, and their 2 young children. They welcomed Nora with surprising warmth, asking few questions beyond what Manuel had already told them. After a hot meal and a bath, Nora found herself in a tiny but clean bedroom, wearing a borrowed nightgown. Despite her bone-deep weariness, sleep eluded her as she worried about Nathan. Had he escaped the ambush? Was he injured or worse? Would Manuel's friends find him in time? The medallion of San Cristobal still hung around her neck, and Nora clutched it as she whispered prayers into the darkness. Please let him be safe. Please let him find his way to me. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the sounds of children's voices in the courtyard. For a moment, disoriented, Nora couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the past days came flooding back, along with renewed worry for Nathan. Dressing quickly in her green dress, which Louisa had kindly washed and pressed overnight, Nora joined the family for breakfast. Diego had already left for work, but Louisa and the children greeted her cheerfully. Tio Manuel said to tell you he will send word as soon as his friends return, Louisa informed her as she poured coffee. Meanwhile, you are welcome to stay as long as needed. Thank you, Nora said sincerely. But I should look for work. I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely. Louisa considered this. What kind of work do you do? I kept books for my father's store. I can sew, cook reasonably well. I'm willing to learn anything that would earn an honest wage. Louisa tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. Senora Mendoza at the dress shop was saying just yesterday that she needs help with her accounts, and she is looking for someone who can sew fine stitches for her special orders. Hope flared within Nora. Could you introduce me? Of course, Louisa agreed with a smile. We can go this morning if you like. The dress shop was located near the plaza, a surprisingly elegant establishment with large windows displaying fashionable gowns. Senora Mendoza, a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, greeted Louisa warmly before turning her assessing gaze on Nora. So you need work and you claim to be good with numbers and needlework, she said without preamble. Show me. For the next hour, Nora demonstrated her sewing skills and helped reconcile a column of figures in the shop's ledger. By the end, Senora Mendoza seemed cautiously impressed. You'll do, she announced. I can offer you room and board plus $2 a week to start. There's a small apartment above the shop where my last assistant lived. If you prove reliable, we can discuss a raise after a month. It was a fair offer, better than Nora had dared hope for. Thank you, Senora. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. The older woman softened slightly. Luisa tells me you've had a difficult journey. Take today to rest and settle your affairs. After thanking Senora Mendoza and saying goodbye to Luisa, who needed to return home to her children, Nora found herself with time to spare. Unable to sit still while waiting for news of Nathan, she decided to explore the plaza. Santa Fe in daylight was a colorful, bustling place. The plaza was filled with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handcrafted jewelry. Nora wandered among them, her worry temporarily eased by the sights and sounds of the vibrant city. As noon approached, she found herself drawn back toward the Coyote Saloon. Perhaps Manuel had received word about Nathan. Heart in her throat, Nora pushed through the swinging doors once more. The saloon was quieter at this hour, with only a few customers nursing drinks at the bar. Manuel looked up as she entered, his expression inscrutable. "Any news?" Nora asked without preamble as she approached. "Not yet," the old man replied. "My friends should return soon." He poured her a glass of water without being asked. "Did you find a place to stay?" Nora nodded, explaining about the position with Senora Mendoza. "It seems perfect, but—" She hesitated. "I don't want Nathan to think I've given up on him if he comes looking for me." Manuel's eyes softened with understanding. "I will tell him where to find you when he comes." "When, not if?" Nora asked, hope rising despite her fear. The old bartender smiled slightly. "Nathan Everett is hard to kill. I have seen him survive worse situations." Before Nora could ask what he meant, the saloon doors swung open again. A tall man with a weathered face and a sheriff's badge on his chest stepped inside, his gaze immediately falling on Nora. "Miss Kelly," he asked, approaching them. "I'm Sheriff Taylor, been looking for you." Nora's heart sank. Had Hargrove's influence reached even here? "Is something wrong, Sheriff? Got a message for you," he replied, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Came in by telegraph this morning." With trembling fingers, Nora unfolded the paper. "Nora, stop him. Safe stop. Minor injury stop. Will arrive Santa Fe tomorrow. Stop. Wait for me. Stop." Nathan relief swept through her so strongly that her knees nearly buckled. "He's alive," she whispered, passing the telegram to Manuel, who read it with a satisfied nod. "Told you," the old man said with a hint of smugness. "Hard to kill." The sheriff was watching her curiously. "Mind if I ask what this is about? Don't often get mysterious ladies arriving alone asking after missing men." Manuel answered before Nora could. "Family business, Roberto." "Nothing to concern yourself with." Sheriff Taylor looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. "Well, if you need anything, Miss Kelly, my office is just down the street." After the sheriff left, Nora thanked Manuel for his help and returned to Lewis's house to share the good news. For the first time since leaving Willow Creek, she felt a sense of genuine hope for the future. That evening, as she helped Lewisa prepare dinner, Nora found herself wondering what would happen when Nathan arrived. Would he stay in Santa Fe, or would he continue his search for his brother immediately? And what did that mean for whatever was growing between them? "You are thinking about him, no?" Lewisa asked with a knowing smile as she noticed Nora's distraction. "This Nathan who saved you." Nora blushed, embarrassed to be so transparent. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another woman who has been in love," Lewisa replied gently. "Your face changes when you speak his name." "I barely know him," Nora protested, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Sometimes the heart knows in an instant what the head takes time to understand," Lewisa said with a shrug, turning back to her cooking. That night, as Nora lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Santa Fe, she admitted to herself that Lewisa might be right. In the short time she'd known Nathan Everett, he had become more important to her than anyone since her parents. The thought of him continuing his journey without her left an ache in her chest that she couldn't ignore. But what right did she have to expect anything from him? He had already done more for her than she could ever repay. And his mission to find his brother was far more important than the feelings of a woman he'd known for less than a week. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Nora eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with gunfire and the memory of Nathan's brief, fierce kiss. Morning brought sunshine and nervous anticipation. After breakfast with Lewis's family, Nora walked to Senora Mendoza's shop to see the apartment that would be her new home. It was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a tiny stove for cooking and heat. A window overlooked the street, letting in ample light for sewing. "It's perfect," Nora told Senora Mendoza sincerely. "Thank you for this opportunity." "Be here at 8 tomorrow," the older woman reminded her, "and bring your things. I run a respectable business, so no male visitors after dark." Nora blushed at the implication but nodded her agreement. After arranging to move her few belongings the following day, she headed toward the plaza, drawn by the knowledge that Nathan might arrive at any moment. The Coyote Saloon was her first stop. Manuel greeted her with a nod, informing her that there had been no further word from Nathan. "But if he said tomorrow in the telegram, he will be here tomorrow," the old bartender assured her. "Nathan keeps his word." Nora spent the day alternating between exploring the city and returning to the plaza to watch for any sign of Nathan. By evening, with no appearance from the cowboy, she reluctantly returned to Lewis's house for her last night there. "He will come," Lewis said confidently as they prepared for bed. "Men sometimes take longer than they think, especially when they are hurt." The reminder that Nathan was injured, even if only slightly according to his telegram, sent a fresh wave of worry through Nora. She slept poorly, rising before dawn to dress and pack her few belongings in preparation for moving to the apartment above the dress shop. After a hearty breakfast and emotional farewells to Lewisa and her family, who had shown such kindness to a stranger, Nora made her way once more to the plaza. The morning was cool, the sky a brilliant blue that reminded her of Nathan's eyes. She settled on a bench near the cathedral, her small bundle beside her, watching as the city came to life around her. Vendors set up their stalls, women gathered at the well to draw water and exchange gossip, and merchants opened their shops for the day's business. Hours passed. Nora's anxiety grew with each minute. What if Nathan had been more seriously injured than he'd let on? What if Hargrove's men had found him again after he sent the telegram? By noon, hunger drove her to buy a tamale from a vendor, though she ate it without really tasting it. As the sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the plaza, Nora's hope began to fade. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps, having delivered her safely to Santa Fe, he had decided to continue his search for his brother without the burden of her company. The thought brought tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. She had no claim on Nathan Everett. He had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. With a heavy heart, Nora picked up her bundle and began walking toward Senora Mendoza's shop. It was time to start her new life, with or without Nathan. She had just turned the corner when she heard the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching from the direction of the main road into town. Nora froze, her heart suddenly pounding. Slowly she turned. A rider was approaching the plaza, his broad-shouldered silhouette instantly recognizable despite the distance. Even from here, she could see that his left arm was bound in a sling, and he rode with the slightly stiff posture of a man in pain. But he was alive, and he was here. Nathan's gaze swept the plaza, searching. When he spotted Nora standing at the corner, he reined in his horse and dismounted somewhat awkwardly due to his injured arm. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance, neither moving. Then, dropping her bundle where she stood, Nora ran toward him. Nathan met her halfway, his good arm opening to receive her as she flew into his embrace. The force of her momentum made him stagger slightly, a grunt of pain escaping him as his injured arm was jostled, but he didn't let go. "You're hurt," Nora said, pulling back to examine him with concerned eyes. "What happened? How did you escape?" Nathan's face was bruised, a healing cut visible along his jawline, but his blue eyes were warm as they met hers. "Got shot in the shoulder, nothing serious. One of Hargrove's men helped me after the others left." "What? Why would he help you?" "Turns out he had a score to settle with Hargrove himself," Nathan explained. "He patched me up, got me to a doctor in Las Vegas, then helped me send that telegram." His good hand came up to touch her cheek. "I was afraid you wouldn't wait." Of course I waited, Nora replied, her voice breaking slightly. How could I not? Something shifted in Nathan's expression, relief, mixed with a tenderness that made her breath catch. I told you once you'd never walk alone again, he said softly. I meant it, Nora. Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her, not the brief, desperate kiss of their parting at the lined shack, but a gentle, thorough claiming that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, Nora became aware that they were standing in the middle of the plaza, drawing curious looks from passers-by. We should go somewhere more private, she murmured, embarrassed by the public display. Nathan nodded, keeping his good arm around her waist as they walked toward his horse. Manuel told me you found work at a dress shop. Yes, with Senora Mendoza. I start tomorrow. Nora retrieved her bundle from where she dropped it. She's given me the apartment above the shop. That's good, Nathan said, though there was a note in his voice she couldn't quite identify. You'll be settled then. They walked in silence for a moment, Nora leading the way toward the dress shop while Nathan led his horse beside them. There was so much she wanted to ask, so much she needed to know about what would happen next, but the words stuck in her throat. Finally, as they approached Senora Mendoza's establishment, Nathan spoke. I met with Manuel before looking for you. He had news of my brother. Nora's heart sank, certain that this meant Nathan would be leaving immediately. What did he say? James is alive, Nathan said, his expression a mix of relief and determination. He's being held at a ranch near the border. The cattle buyer Collins is using him and other men as forced labor, running stolen cattle into Mexico. Oh, Nathan, Nora breathed. That's terrible, but at least you know he's alive. Yes, Nathan hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'll need to go after him. It's dangerous work. I can't ask you to be part of that. There it was, the goodbye she'd been dreading. Nora nodded, fighting to keep her expression neutral. I understand. When will you leave? As soon as my shoulders healed enough for travel. A week, maybe 2, according to the doctor in Las Vegas. Nathan was watching her closely, but I was hoping. That is, I wanted to ask if you'd consider waiting for me to return. Nora's head snapped up, hope flaring within her. Waiting. I know it's a lot to ask, Nathan continued, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. We haven't known each other long, and I can't promise it won't be dangerous, but the thought of you was what kept me going after that ambush. And I'd like to think that when this is over, we might have a chance to see what's between us without Hargrove's men trying to kill us. A smile spread across Nora's face, relief and joy flooding through her. I'll wait, she said simply, however long it takes. The tension in Nathan's shoulders eased. I don't want to leave you at all, he admitted, but James is my brother. I have to try. Of course you do, Nora agreed. Family is everything. Yes, Nathan said, his gaze intense as it held hers. Family is everything. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. In that moment, Nora knew that whatever the future held, she and Nathan would face it together. Come, she said, taking his hand. Let me show you my new home, and then you can tell me more about this plan to rescue your brother. As they entered the dress shop, Senora Mendoza looked up from her ledger, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Nathan with his arm in a sling. I see your friend has arrived, she observed dryly. Remember what I said about visitors after dark, Miss Kelly. Yes, Senora, Nora replied, suppressing a smile at Nathan's confused expression. This is Nathan Everett. Nathan, this is my new employer, Senora Mendoza. Nathan tipped his hat respectfully. Madam, I want to thank you for giving Nora a position. She's had a difficult time. Senora Mendoza's stern expression softened slightly. She showed skill and determination. Those are qualities I value, she eyed his sling. You've been injured? Yes, madam, nothing that won't heal with time. The older woman nodded, then turned to Nora. Show him the apartment if you wish, but leave the door open. I run a respectable establishment. Of course, Senora, Nora agreed, leading Nathan toward the narrow staircase at the back of the shop. The apartment looked even smaller with Nathan's tall frame filling it, but Nora found she didn't mind. She watched as he examined the space, noting the way his gaze lingered on the single narrow bed. It's not much, she said, suddenly self-conscious, but it's more than I had in Willow Creek. It's perfect, Nathan replied, turning to face her. A good place to start fresh. Is that what we're doing? Nora asked softly. Starting fresh, Nathan took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I hope so. Once James is safe, I want to find a place to settle, no more drifting. His blue eyes held her steadily. And I want you with me, Nora, if that's what you want too. It is, she whispered, her heart so full she could hardly speak. More than anything. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new experiences. Nora quickly settled into her role at the dress shop, her skilled needlework and tidy bookkeeping earning Senora Mendoza's grudging approval. In the evenings, when the shop closed, Nathan would come to escort her to dinner, sometimes at a small restaurant near the plaza, other times bringing food to share in her tiny apartment. His shoulder was healing well, though he chafed at the enforced inactivity. To keep him occupied, Nora enlisted his help in exploring Santa Fe, discovering together the city that might become their home. They talked for hours about their childhoods, their dreams, the experiences that had shaped them. Nathan told her about the ranch in Texas, describing the land with such longing that Nora understood how deeply its loss had wounded him. In turn, she shared memories of her mother, the only person who had truly understood and loved her unconditionally. She would have liked you, Nora said one evening as they sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the sunset paint the adobe buildings gold. She always said I needed someone steady, someone I could count on. And am I, Nathan asked, his arm around her shoulders, someone you can count on? Nora leaned into his embrace, the most reliable man I've ever known. As the day of Nathan's departure approached, Nora tried to hide her growing anxiety. Manuel had arranged for 2 trusted friends to accompany Nathan to the border, men who knew the territory and had experience with dangerous missions. The plan was sound, but the risks were real. The night before he was to leave, they sat at the small table in Nora's apartment, picking at the meal she had prepared. Neither had much appetite, the weight of their impending separation hanging heavily between them. I'll be back as soon as I can, Nathan promised, reaching across the table to take her hand. 2 weeks, 3 at most, Nora nodded, fighting back tears. I know, and I'll be here waiting, Nora, Nathan's voice was serious. If something happens to me, don't, she interrupted, squeezing his hand. Don't say it. I have to, he insisted gently. If I don't come back, Manuel will make sure you're taken care of. I've made arrangements. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. I don't want arrangements. I want you to come back safely. Nathan stood, pulling her into his arms. I will do everything in my power to return to you, but I need to know you'll be all right, no matter what happens. Nora pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Just be careful. Please, I promise. He tilted her chin up, his blue eyes solemn. And when I return, Nora Kelly, I intend to ask you properly to be my wife, her breath caught. Nathan, not now, he said with a small smile. I want to do it right when there's no shadow hanging over us. But I wanted you to know my intentions. Nora reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. My answer will be yes, today, tomorrow, whenever you ask. Nathan's kiss was tender, a promise sealed without words. Nora returned it with all the love and fear in her heart, knowing that this moment would have to sustain her through the long, uncertain days ahead. Dawn came too soon. Nora walked with Nathan to the stable where Manuel's friends were waiting with horses and supplies. The 2 men brothers named Carlos and Miguel greeted her respectfully, assuring her they would bring Nathan back safely. The moment of parting was brief, but heartbreaking. Nathan held her tightly, whispering promises against her hair. Then, with a final kiss, he mounted his horse and rode away, not looking back. Nora stood watching until the 3 riders disappeared from view, the medallion of San Cristobal clutched tightly in her hand. Only then did she allow herself to weep, the tears she'd held back all night flowing freely as she made her way back to the dress shop. Senora Mendoza took one look at her swollen eyes and tear-streaked face and wordlessly handed her a handkerchief. Men, she said with a sigh. They leave, but the strong ones return. I hope you're right, Nora replied, dabbing at her eyes. I usually am, the older woman stated matter-of-factly. Now we have work to do. Mrs. Hamilton's gown must be finished by tomorrow. Grateful for the distraction, Nora threw herself into her duties at the shop. The days passed slowly, each one marked off mentally as bringing Nathan one step closer to returning to her. At night, alone in her apartment, she reread the few notes he had left her, simple messages of affection written in his bold hand, and prayed for his safe return. A week passed, then two. June turned to July, bringing hotter days and spectacular thunderstorms that cooled the evenings. Nora visited the Coyote Saloon daily, hoping for news, but Manuel could only tell her that no word was not necessarily bad news. By the third week, Nora's anxiety had become a constant companion. Even Señora Mendoza noticed, giving her simpler tasks that required less concentration as her attention wandered more frequently. It was on the 23rd day after Nathan's departure Nora had been counting that the bell above the shop door jingled, announcing a customer. Nora looked up from the hem she was stitching to see Sheriff Taylor standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Miss Kelly," he said, removing his hat. "Could I have a word?" Heart-pounding, Nora set aside her sewing and followed him outside. "What is it, Sheriff? Is it Nathan?" The lawman's expression was grave. "There's been some trouble at the border, a shootout at a ranch owned by a man named Collins." Nora's legs threatened to give way. "And Nathan, his brother, reports are confused," Sheriff Taylor admitted. "Several men were killed, including Collins. Others were arrested by the Mexican authorities." He hesitated. "I thought you should know. Manuel asked me to tell you he's trying to get more information." "Thank you," Nora managed, her voice barely audible. Is there anything I can do?" The sheriff shook his head. "Just wait, I'm afraid. As soon as we know anything for certain, I'll let you know." After he left, Nora stood motionless on the sidewalk, unable to process the news. Nathan could be dead, injured, or in a Mexican prison, or he could be on his way back to her with his brother. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing the worst. Señora Mendoza found her there, still staring blankly at the street. Without a word, the older woman led her back inside and upstairs to her apartment, sat her down and poured her a small glass of brandy. "Drink," she ordered. "Then tell me what has happened." Nora obeyed, the liquor burning a path down her throat and bringing her back to herself. Haltingly, she explained what the sheriff had told her. Señora Mendoza listened without interruption, her normally stern face softened with compassion. When Nora finished, she patted her hand awkwardly. "You will stay home tomorrow. I can manage the shop. You need rest." "No," Nora protested. "I need to work. I'll go mad if I'm alone with my thoughts all day." After a moment's consideration, the older woman nodded. "Very well. But no detailed work. You will help with customers only." That night was the longest of Nora's life. She paced her small apartment, alternating between prayer and tears until exhaustion finally claimed her near dawn. She woke to knocking at her door, instantly alert. "Nora, are you awake?" It was Lewis's voice, urgent and excited. Stumbling to the door, Nora flung it open to find Lewisa breathless on the landing. "What is it? Is there news?" "Tio Manuel sent me," Lewisa explained, beaming. "They're back. Nathan and his brother arrived at the saloon an hour ago." "Nathan is asking for you." Relief hit Nora with such force that she swayed on her feet. "He's alive. He's all right." "Alive and well enough to be impatient," Lewisa laughed. "Get dressed quickly." Never had Nora dressed faster. She barely paused to run a comb through her hair before following Lewisa down the stairs and through the still dark streets toward the Coyote Saloon. The saloon was closed to regular customers at this early hour, but the door opened at Lewis's knock. Manuel stood aside to let them enter, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. "He is in the back," the old man said, nodding toward his office. "Go." Nora practically ran across the empty saloon, her heart pounding. She pushed open the office door and stopped short at the sight that greeted her. Nathan sat in a chair, his face bruised and tired but wonderfully, blessedly alive. Beside him, a younger man who could only be his brother James reclined on a makeshift cot, his legs splinted and bandaged. At her entrance, Nathan stood, his eyes lighting up as they found hers. "Nora." She flew across the room into his arms, not caring about his bruises or the audience. Nathan held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, murmuring her name over and over like a prayer. When they finally broke apart, Nora examined him more carefully. Besides the bruises, he had a new scar along his temple, and he held himself stiffly as if his ribs were sore. But he was whole, he was alive, and he was here. "You came back to me," she whispered, touching his face gently. "I promised I would," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. A discreet cough from the cot reminded them they weren't alone. Nathan turned, keeping one arm around Nora's waist. "James, this is Nora Kelly, the woman I told you about. Nora, my brother James." James Everett was slighter than his brother, with the same dark hair but hazel eyes instead of blue. Despite his obvious discomfort, he smiled warmly at Nora. "So you're the reason my stubborn brother risked his neck to rescue me. I'd stand to greet you properly, but—" He gestured to his injured leg. "Please, don't move on my account," Nora said, stepping forward to take his offered hand. "I'm just so glad Nathan found you." "He did more than find me," James replied with a grateful look at his brother. "He and those two Mexican fellows took on Collins and his entire gang, freed not just me but a dozen other men who'd been forced to work the ranch." "What happened?" Nora asked, turning back to Nathan. "The sheriff said there was a shootout." Nathan nodded grimly. "Collins didn't go down easy. Had at least 10 armed men working for him. We managed to free the prisoners, but James took a bullet in the leg during the escape. We've been hiding out across the border, waiting for things to settle and for him to be strong enough to travel." "The important thing is you're both safe now," Nora said, relief making her dizzy. "What happens next?" The brothers exchanged a look. "We've been talking about that," Nathan said. "James needs time to heal properly, and I made a promise to ask you something when I returned." Nora's heart skipped a beat as Nathan took both her hands in his. "Nora Kelly, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me?" Though she'd been expecting the question, had even prepared her answer weeks ago, Nora found herself momentarily speechless. This man, who had saved her in more ways than she could count, was offering her everything she'd ever wanted. Love, family, a future. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Nathan Everett, I will marry you." The joy that spread across Nathan's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her close, sealing their promise with a kiss that left no doubt of his love. James cleared his throat again, louder this time. "I hate to interrupt, but if you two are going to keep that up, I might need to find somewhere else to recuperate." Nathan laughed, the sound rich and carefree in a way Nora had never heard before. "Sorry, brother, can't help myself." "Clearly," James replied dryly, though his eyes were kind. "I suppose I'll have to get used to it if we're all going to be living together." Nora looked between the brothers, confused. Living together? Nathan led her to a chair, sitting beside her with their hands still joined. "That's the other thing we've been discussing. Before all this happened, James and I were talking about starting fresh somewhere new. With the money from selling our Texas property, we have enough to buy a small ranch." "Nathan told me about his plans to settle down," James continued. "And about the woman who changed his mind about drifting. Seems to me New Mexico might be a good place for a fresh start." "There's land available near Santa Fe," Nathan explained, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "Good grazing, water rights, not too far from town. We could build a house, raise cattle, maybe horses." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "If that's something you'd want." Nora thought about the life he was offering, a home of her own, a family to love, work that had meaning. After years of uncertainty and loss, it seemed almost too good to be true. "I want that more than anything," she said softly. "A home with you." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the small church near the plaza. Senora Mendoza closed the shop for the day and helped Nora prepare a wedding dress, a modest creation of ivory satin that brought tears to Nathan's eyes when he saw her walking down the aisle. Manuel gave the bride away, grumbling good-naturedly about losing his best customer now that Nathan would be settling down. James, his leg still healing but able to stand with the aid of a cane, served as his brother's best man. Luisa and her family attended, along with several of Nathan's friends from his various travels. Even Sheriff Taylor made an appearance, giving the couple his blessing and a warning to Nathan to keep out of trouble now that you're a family man. The small ranch they purchased was 15 miles outside Santa Fe, with a view of the mountains Nathan had once described to Nora. The house was little more than a two-room cabin, but Nathan promised they would expand it as their family grew. James stayed with them as he recovered, his presence a welcome addition to their new household. The brothers worked well together, their complementary skills making the ranch thrive despite its modest beginnings. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Nora found happiness in the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to ride properly, helped with the cattle, and turned the simple cabin into a home filled with warmth and love. In the evenings, the three of them would sit around the fire, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Word reached them occasionally of Hargrove. The man had overextended himself financially and lost most of his holdings. Last they heard, he had moved to California, his desire for revenge apparently cooled by his more pressing troubles. By spring, as new life burst forth across the land, Nora had news of her own to share. On a warm evening in April, as she and Nathan sat on the porch watching the sunset turn the mountains the color of roses, she took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to need that bigger house sooner than we thought," she said softly. Nathan's eyes widened in wonder. "A baby." "Are you sure?" Nora nodded, her heart full as she watched joy spread across his beloved face. "In November, the doctor thinks." Nathan gathered her into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent. "I never thought I could be this happy," he murmured against her hair. "When I found you trying to walk out of Willow Creek alone, I had no idea you'd end up giving me everything I ever wanted." "And what was that?" Nora asked, though she knew the answer. "A home," he said simply. "A family, someone to love who loves me back." His hand rested protectively over their unborn child. "You'll never walk alone again, Nora Everett. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." As the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing like diamonds scattered across the velvet darkness, Nora leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. From the lonely, frightened woman who had fled Willow Creek with nothing but a bundle of meager possessions, to the beloved wife and expectant mother she was now, the journey had been extraordinary. "I'm holding you to that promise," she whispered, turning her face up for his kiss as the first evening star winked into existence above them. And in the years that followed through the birth of their children, the expansion of their ranch, the joys and sorrows that came with a life fully lived, Nathan kept his word. Nora Kelly Everett never walked alone again.